Right. So, good evening, friends. In this session, I'll be discussing about the Barrett's esophagus. Uh, in the Barrett's esophagus, I'll be discussing about the first point, that is a definition, right? And what is definition? Definition is change in the mucosa of the esophagus from squamous epithelium to metaplastic columnar epithelium as a result of GERD. So, what is it trying to tell us is, now in the Barrett's esophagus, there is a change in the mucosa of the esophagus from squamous epithelium to metaplastic, right? Metaplastic columnar epithelium as a result of GERD. That means in this session, if you look into this point here, right? If you look into this, now this is a section. This is a small section of the small mucosa here. Now this is a squamous epithelium of the esophagus. Now what happens here is, because of the gastric reflex, because of this reflex, continuous reflex from the stomach into the esophagus, because of any pathology, now what happens here is the squamous epithelium, remember that the squamous epithelium, it metaplas, okay, it converts, or it metaplasia happens, and where the squamous epithelium gets converted to columnar epithelium, as converted to columnar epithelium, right? Now what exactly is trying to tell us is, now what what columnar epithelium? What we have, an intestinal columnar epithelium. Then how do you tell this as intestinal columnar epithelium? Say example, you have taken the biopsy and you have seen under the microscope. Now what are the structures present in this in the epithelium on the Barrett's esophagus? Is you have got some cells known as goblet cells. Remember, you have got a goblet cells, and then how do you differentiate this is in goblet cells, right? Because if you look into the nucleus, okay, the shape of the nucleus is triangle. Remember, that's the important point. The shape of the nucleus is triangle. Shape of the nucleus is triangle. And if you look into the distribution of the goblet cells in this columnar epithelium, intestinal columnar epithelium, where it is the goblet cells are randomly distributed. That means you don't have any in rows like structure. Now what happens here is, they can ask you the question of how do you differentiate the pseudo goblet cells from the goblet cells. The goblet cells, if you look at the goblet cells, I have told you the nucleus is triangular, whereas in the pseudo goblet cell there are no triangular nucleus, okay, and the arrangement of the goblet cells are in rows, okay, okay, are in rows. So that's the point we need to understand in the definition. So ultimately, I just want to tell you the change in the mucosa of an esophagus from squamous epithelium to metaplastic columnar epithelium. What columnar? Intestinal columnar epithelium, as a result of GERD is known as Barrett's esophagus. Now, let us understand how the Barrett's esophagus is formed, or how it occurs. In this, you have got something known as exposure of esophageal epithelium to gastric and duodenal fluids. Okay. Now, you have, this is I have told you, this is a stomach here. Okay. And then you have a gastric contents. Now, the reflex of the gastric contents into the esophagus, the reflex of the gastric contents into the reflex. Now, what happens here is, the squamous epithelium, because of this gastric, they convert, or they metaplace into, they undergoes metaplasia. Metaplasia in the sense change in the change. It's not an it's in the cells of, it's a just change in the epithelium, right? The squamous epithelium to columnar, it's a change. And this columnar cells has mucus secreting goblet cells, okay, they have mucus secreting goblet cells, and these columnar cells are which columnar cells? They are intestinal columnar cells, which I have already discussed. And if you leave this, if they continues, okay, if the reflex happens from the stomach, from the duodenum into the esophagus, okay, now what happens here is, the metaplasia later in the later stage, the metaplasia converts into the dysplasia. That means you can see the cells, okay, you can see the undifferentiated or the cells of the columnar epithelium. It's we can see one, not all the cells. Some cells, they cannot poorly differentiate, okay. They don't have a proper structure of the cell, they don't have proper structure of the nucleus, they don't have the proper structure of the what cytoplasm. Okay, now the point here is the question can rise in the pathogenesis is you have something known as and this Barrett is metaplasia. If you go under in depth in the in regarding the nucleus, okay, you have got something known as upgrading of SHH leading to phosphorylation of SMAD proteins. Okay, SMAD proteins. Now, this SMAD interacts with CDX2 notch. Okay, CDX2. That means you need to understand if you look into the micrological, if you go in depth, okay, and this Barrett's esophagus, in the Barrett we have got something as VNT notch signaling pathway. Because of this VNT notch signaling pathway, you get this Barrett's esophagus. So what happens in this? You can just remember upgrading of SHH leading to phosphorylation of SMAD proteins, and this SMAD intake, this SMAD interacts with the CDX2, and ultimately there is a formation of, at the end you get the formation of Barrett's esophagus. Okay, that's all for now. Let us continue the next session. Thank you.